Welcome back. Even the most cautious of public health experts are now saying we're turning the corner in the coronavirus pandemic. There were days last week when Los Angeles, once overwhelmed with cases, reported no new deaths. Welcome back to Meet the Press.
Good to be with you, Chuck.
Let me start with what the headline yesterday from the CDC about the virus spreading through aerosol form. And I'll be honest with you, Dr. Fauci, I had to check the date of the article to make sure it wasn't from a year earlier. This felt like a known thing.
This is going to have an emphasis on proper ventilation.
Would listen to the scientists when it came to testing, tracing, treatment, mask wearing, separation, ventilation, sanitation. Did I say that?
Well, I mean, as you mentioned, Chuck, correctly, this is something we've known for some time now. So when you have aerosol, then the distance between people becomes a little bit more problematic. That could hold true for schools. It brings out the possibility that you're going to have to make sure that indoors, when you have unvaccinated people, that people wear a mask. It's proper ventilation, and number two, mask wearing. Practically a non-existent flu season. We've had practically a non-existent flu season this year. During their winter, same thing. They had almost no flu. The Australians during their winter, same thing. They had almost no flu, largely due to the kinds of things, including mask wearing. That's the reason, Chuck, why we plead with people to get vaccinated. Because season like the coming fall or winter, you're going to see a significant surge. There's no doubt about that. That's the reason why vaccinations are so important. Namely, if we get 70% of the people vaccinated by the 4th of July, namely one single dose. So you set a goal. I think it's a reasonable goal. I believe we'll get there. But, you know, as you get less and less people in the cohort of unvaccinated, it becomes more difficult to get them. When you have a large cohort of unvaccinated people, then you get your 3 to 4, less and less people in the cohort of unvaccinated, it becomes more difficult to get them when you have there. But the end game of this all, George, is going to be to get people vaccinated, but to get vaccines donated. One of the ways to do that is to have the big companies that have the capability of making vaccines to really scale up in a great way to get literally hundreds of millions of doses. So there's an immediate problem, which is hospital beds. You know, they've really got to get hospital beds and do really what the Chinese did way back a year or so ago. Then there's the problem looking forward of how you're going to shut this down. How are you going to turn it around? Shutting down the government. I have advised them in the past that you really need to do that. You've got to shut down. And one of the ways to do that is to shut down. Yeah, I don't think that's the case, George. They can scale up. You know, they've done an extraordinary amount. You've got to give them credit. They've really done something that is really quite impressive in the way they've gotten their vaccine supply up and out for the rest of the world.
We seem to be bumping up against the limits of Americans willing and eager to get the vaccine. How do we convince the holdouts?
Is to get trusted messengers, people who they trust, to get to them, to convince them why it's important, to clergy or even to their family doctor, to explain and convince them why it's important for them. The other way is what we're doing, is to make it extremely easy for people to get vaccinated. Just walk in and get vaccinated. There's two major ways I believe we can just get into that group. Well, George, I hope that next Mother's Day we're going to see a dramatic difference than what we're seeing right now. I have some conditions to that, George. We've got to make sure that we get the overwhelming proportion of the population vaccinated now. That being the case, I think we could approach what we used to remember as normal before all of this tragedy happened.